in translating the New Testament, I came more and more. I became somewhat indignant, actually, at the history of translation that one's fighting against. In part, I mean, just they're the traditional translations, which, with the best will in the world, followed theological orthodoxy in their time and place. Mm-hmm. Okay, and many people who are considered authorities on what, say, Paul taught, learned some Greek in seminary, and they learned to translate certain words according to the dogmatic tradition, which has determined a lot of translation for 500 years or more. And more than that, actually, the earlier, even the translations into Latin of earlier centuries. But then there are the modern translations, like the New International Version, which go out of their way to impose readings on the text that clearly aren't there in the Greek in order to make them conform, say, to a certain sort of evangelical understanding.
So I know what you're implying, but can you spell out some of the translation mishaps?
Well, mishaps. That would be a generous way of putting it. The New International Version, for instance, imposes readings that are clearly false. Again and again, it adds words. But to do it off the top of my head, I don't know. Of course, there's the famous Christ preach in the gospel to the dead. Mm-hmm. Tis nekris, or if you speak Erasmian, tois nekrois. Disgusting way to talk about, but tis nekris. And for instance, the editors in the New International Version, being evangelicals, believe that it's impossible to be saved after death, even though clearly that their belief doesn't conform to the beliefs of most of the writers of the New Testament, or any of them actually. But anyway, they were sure that, so they put in, for this reason the gospel was preached to persons who since that time have died, or something. What the Greek clearly does not say. I mean, it clearly uses dative, meaning that the dead as dead are recipients of the gospel there. But that's just one example. It happens again and again and again. Or take Jude 19, for instance, where any sort of, I'll leave Jude 19 out because that would really get obscure. I mean, that would be an esoteric. I'd be talking for 2 hours explaining concepts of psyche and pneuma and all that. But wherever flesh is used in Paul, they don't want to use the word flesh because they think that so turn it into sinful human nature. And so just in doing that, they've already made decisions regarding how you're allowed to understand Paul's language. And it's not what he means. I mean, in one sense, he does mean sin, fallen human nature. It's true, but he means flesh, too. And you have to understand his use of the word. But they're far graver violations than that. I'm afraid I'd have to go back through my notes from the translation. But this happens all the time. And a lot of Christians pick up the older translation, King James Bible, which was not an attempt to distort what the Greek said, but it was what the 16th to 17th century scholars, deep in a certain semi-reformed tradition with deep Catholic roots of Anglicanism, understood Paul to be saying. Just for instance, when a modern Christian reads the word justification, he or she may think he knows what that word means, or she may think that word means what dikaiosis means, but it's not. I mean, it's certainly not what Paul understood it to mean. Or a word like proorizein, which is translated as predestination. Well, any good classicist knows the problem with translating that the way it's traditionally translated. And the result is that we come away from the New Testament, or come away from these texts, thinking that we've read the Word of God, when what we've done, for the most part, in all innocence, is read an already dogmatically inflected and in some way distorted translation through our dogmatic expectations. How many Christians read Romans chapters 9 through 11 as a continuous discourse?
Yeah.
Almost none.
If they read it at all, yeah.
And if they do, So they get to chapter 9, and Paul says, what if, God, being inclined, already that's a problem. I would translate that as, although inclined to make his wrath, nonetheless tolerate it. All right, wait. So the whole vessels of wrath passage, which is written in a consciously conditional voice. Well, how much of Augustinian tradition, how much of Reformed tradition, Lutheran tradition, even Thomistic tradition, takes that as a statement of how things are? And yet for Paul, it's the statement of a problem that he agonizes over for 3 chapters and arrives at the opposite conclusion. Did they stumble so that they might fall? No. Were they actually vessels of wrath? No. All were bound in disobedience, or rather, all were bound in a kind of fractious inability to be convinced or lack of trust or whatever.
Do you anticipate your translation of the New Testament to be met with more criticism than anything else you've done?
Yeah. From every single direction.
Particularly when it comes to justification and how that's interpreted in Romans, there's entire traditions reliant upon that.
Oh yeah, and unfortunately, they're wrong. The funny thing is, what's curious about this is that this isn't even an open debate in real New Testament scholarship. I mean, no competent New Testament scholar, no matter what his or her dogmatic commitments is, none of any stature actually believes, for instance, that Calvin got Paul right. Okay, or that Luther got Paul right, or that even the late Augustine got Paul right. They all know that you can't move from Paul's Greek to those doctrinal assertions without radically misreading Paul and then ignoring other parts of Paul. I mean, in very profound ways.